Time didn't slow, it sharpened, every second cutting clean through the haze of fear until all that remained was instinct. The intruder lunged fully through the window, crashing onto the kitchen floor in a spray of snow and cold air. I stepped back fast, raising the gun higher, my arms trembling but locked into place. His boots scraped against the tile as he pushed up to his knees, cursing under his breath, eyes narrowing when he saw how close I was. "Don't," I warned, my voice louder than I expected, louder than I had ever spoken in this house since Linda died. He hesitated, one hand bracing on the counter, the other reaching behind him, slowly, deliberately. I understood instantly. He wasn't reaching for balance. He was reaching for something else. Something worse. I stepped forward, pressing the barrel toward his shoulder, close enough he could feel the cold metal brush his jacket. "Hands where I can see them," I said. "Now." He froze, breath heaving, eyes flicking toward the hallway as though he expected his partners to burst in any second. Outside, heavy footsteps pounded across the porch, more urgent now, angrier, the other two realizing their man had gone in alone. A fist slammed against the front door. "Get him open," the leader shouted. "Get the old man out of the way." The intruder on the floor lifted his gaze to mine, something shifting behind his eyes, a calculation, a cold assessment. "You're not gonna shoot me," he muttered, voice low. "You don't have it in you." For a moment, I almost believed him. I saw myself in the reflection of the window, an aging man in a quiet house, clutching a weapon he barely remembered training with. A father. A widower. A man who had already lost too much. But then I heard it, the faint, muffled sound from the basement, Evan whispering my name. Not loud. Not clear. But desperate. He still believed I could protect him. Or maybe he just needed to believe it. Either way, that small, broken whisper anchored me in place. The intruder lunged. Fast. Faster than I expected. He swung his arm toward mine, trying to knock the gun away, his shoulder driving into my chest with enough force to rattle my bones. Pain exploded through my ribs, but I held on, stumbling back into the counter. The gun clattered against the edge before I tightened my grip again, pulling it close before he could wrestle it free. He grabbed my wrist with one hand, the other reaching again for something hidden beneath his jacket. A knife. I saw the glint, thin and lethal. Adrenaline surged through me like lightning. I twisted my arm sharply, slamming my elbow into his jaw. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for me to shove him backward into the cabinets. The whole kitchen shook from the impact. From the front porch, the other men roared and the door shuddered violently, hinges groaning. They were seconds from breaking in. The intruder staggered, knife still in his hand, eyes burning with fury. "You should have just paid," he spat. "We weren't gonna hurt you." It was a lie. A thin, easy lie men like him used to make themselves feel righteous. I raised the gun, not to fire, but to make myself clear. My arm steadied, breath slowing. "Get out," I said. "Climb back through that window. Tell your friends to leave. This ends now." He stared at me, chest heaving, knife trembling in his grip. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, from the hallway, something thudded. The basement door had cracked open. Evan's voice, shaking, trying to stay quiet but failing. "Dad?" The intruder's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes widened. "The kid." He moved toward the hall. Too fast. Too direct. Too inevitable. My heart lurched. Every instinct in me erupted at once. Every memory of Evan as a child running through these halls, every promise Linda asked me to keep, every fear that had taken root since she died. I stepped into his path, shoving him back hard. "You're not touching him," he snarled, raising the knife. I braced myself, ready for the worst. But then, the front door stopped shaking. Silence. A voice outside called out, frustrated, breathless. "Forget it. He's not worth the charge. Fall back." Footsteps retreated through the snow, fast and fading. The intruder stiffened, knife wavering. "What?" he whispered. They were leaving him. His backup was gone. The house grew still again, eerily still. I raised the gun one final inch. "Drop it," I said. "And go." He looked at the knife, then at the window, then at me. Something in him broke, not courage, but certainty. He dropped the blade, turned, and scrambled back through the window, disappearing into the snowstorm like a shadow swallowed by the night. I locked the window, locked the door, locked everything. Then I walked to the basement and opened it fully. Evan stood halfway up the stairs, shaking so violently he had to grip the railing. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw me standing there alive. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." I folded him into my arms, holding him tightly against me, feeling the tremors in his body. He sobbed into my shoulder, the weight of everything he'd done collapsing all at once. "It's over," I murmured. "It's over, son." But even as I said the words, I knew the truth. The night had ended, but the consequences had not. The police, the money, the choices Evan made, the danger he still carried. Those would come tomorrow. Tonight, though, on this cold, broken Christmas Eve, I held my son in the dim glow of the Christmas tree, feeling his tears soak into my shirt, and realized something with a clarity that cut deeper than fear. Forgiveness would not be easy. Healing would not be quick. But for the first time in a long time, we had survived long enough to try. "You're making this worse," he said, voice tightening. "Just open the door. It doesn't have to get ugly." I kept still, angling my body so the edge of the wall shielded most of me from the window. "Walk away," I said, my voice low, steady. "You're not getting anything from this house." A second voice chimed in, deeper, irritated. "Old man, don't be stupid. You think a door is gonna stop us." I tightened my grip on the gun, feeling the weight anchor me. "It'll stop you long enough," I replied. A harsh laugh came from outside, followed by the sound of someone stepping off the porch and crunching through the snow toward the side of the house. I listened, tracking the movement. One stayed at the door. One circled. One lingered near the window. They were splitting up, searching for weakness. Evan's fear was justified. These weren't impulsive men. They were coordinated, patient, methodical. A hand suddenly slammed against the door. Flat, loud, a warning. "Last chance," the first voice growled. "Open the door." I took a slow breath, glancing toward the basement door. The faintest sliver of warm light leaked from the crack, and for a moment I pictured Evan crouched on the stairs, praying I wasn't making the mistake of a lifetime. I stepped closer to the door, just enough that they could hear me clearly. "My son isn't coming out," I said. "And you're not coming in." A long pause followed, cold, heavy, assessing. Then the man spoke again, softer than before, which somehow made it far more terrifying. "You know, I admired you earlier," he said. "Standing up for a kid who wouldn't do the same. But admiration doesn't pay debts." The porch creaked as he leaned forward. "We're coming in. One way or another." His words were punctured by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching toward the back of the house. My stomach dropped. One of them was heading for the kitchen door. Another shadow moved along the side window. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were surrounding us. I took a deep, steady breath, lifting the gun just slightly, still low, still angled away from the door, but ready. I whispered under my breath, almost like a prayer, "Linda, stay with me." The wind roared against the walls, rattling the siding, and then a sudden, sharp noise from the back of the house. A window latch shifting. A hand testing the frame. They were trying to break in. And I realized, with icy clarity, we no longer had 10 minutes. We had seconds. The sound of the window latch snapping upward sliced through the house like a blade, sharp and unmistakable. I spun toward the kitchen, heart punching against my ribs, the gun tightening in my grip as instinct took over. The living room lights flickered from another gust of wind, turning the hallway into a shifting tunnel of shadows that stretched and twisted with every movement outside. Evan, hidden behind the basement door, must have heard it too. His muffled gasp carried faintly through the crack, a small, terrified sound that only made my resolve harden. I moved fast but quiet, my socks sliding over the old hardwood as I crossed the living room and stepped into the darker stretch of the hall. The kitchen light was off, leaving the room lit only by the spill of warm orange from the living room behind me. The contrast made the window ahead glow a ghostly, pale blue. Another scrape came, metal against glass. Someone was lifting the pane. I could see the edge of a gloved hand slip between the crack, testing, pushing, working the frame. They knew this house was old. They knew exactly where it would give. My breath fogged in the cold draft creeping in. I tightened my jaw, took a slow breath through my nose, and steadied the gun at my side. I didn't want to raise it. God knows I didn't. But that hand kept prying upward, pushing further, and I knew they weren't trying to scare us anymore. They were coming in. A voice came from the front porch again, muffled through the walls, but I recognized the tone. The leader. "Hurry up," he called to the man at the window. "Grab the kid if he runs." My stomach twisted. "Check the basement," another voice said from outside. "He's hiding somewhere. Evan." They were hunting him now, not the money. I stepped fully into the kitchen, planting myself between the window and the doorway. "Stop," I said loudly. My voice echoed through the room, firmer than I felt inside. The hand froze. For a moment, the only sound was the wind slamming against the siding and the slow drip of melting snow from the gutters. Then the gloved fingers curled, gripping the window frame like claws. Another shove. The pane lifted an inch higher. A low voice hissed through the gap. "Move aside, old man. Last warning." My pulse hammered. I angled the gun slightly upward, not pointing at the window, but close enough he could see the silhouette of it in the dim light. "This is my home," I said. "You're not coming in." A beat passed. Then another. Then the man gave a quiet, humorless chuckle. "You think that scares us?" he murmured. "You think you're the first tough guy who tried to play hero?" My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sickening realization that he was right. There was nothing heroic about this. It was survival. For me. For Evan. For what little remained of the life Linda and I built. The window jerked again, hard. A shoulder was pushing against it now. A body. Glass rattled in its frame. I took a step closer, voice dropping to a low, controlled growl. "If you come through that window," I said, "you won't walk out." Silence. Heavy. Calculating. Snow hissed against the roof like static. My grip tightened. My breath steadied. The hand slid out of sight, then returned instantly, slamming the window upward in one violent shove. It shot open 3 inches, blasting cold air across my face. A forearm muscled its way inside. Then a shoulder. He was climbing in. I raised the gun higher. "Stop!" I barked. The intruder froze, half his torso now inside my kitchen, one knee wedged against the sill. His face hovered in shadow, but I could see the glint of his eyes when they flicked to the gun. A long, tense moment stretched between us, thin and fragile as glass. "You're not gonna pull that trigger," he whispered. "You're a dad. Dads beg. Dads cry. Dads fold." I swallowed hard, keeping my stance firm even though his words scraped something deep inside me. "You don't know me," I said. He smirked. "I know your son," he replied. "He folds too." Something in me snapped, quiet, internal, a breaking point carved out by months of grief and years of disappointment and one long night of fear. I stepped forward, the gun rising a fraction more. His smirk faded. "Climb back out," I said slowly. "Now." Behind me, a floorboard creaked, the faintest sound, but enough to make the intruder jerk his head, searching the dark hallway. He whispered, "The kid's here." And then, from the front porch, the leader's voice roared, "Now! Go in!" Everything happened at once. The man lunged forward, forcing his way through the window, boots scraping against the sill as he shoved himself into my kitchen. And in that instant, I made a decision that would change the rest of my life. I raised the gun and stepped toward him. Then the voice came again, colder than before, "We'll be back in 10 minutes. When we return, either he walks out with the money, or we come in." A pause. A soft, cruel whisper, "Merry Christmas." The snow swallowed their footsteps as they disappeared into the night, leaving only silence behind. Evan turned to me, tears streaking his cheeks. "Dad, what do we do now?" I stared at the door, the shadows shifting like restless ghosts, and felt the weight of the next 10 minutes press down on my chest like a stone. "We don't run," I said softly. "We decide." Evan's breathing turned ragged the moment the footsteps faded into the storm, as if the quiet outside wasn't relief at all, but a countdown. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, shaking so badly the ornaments on the tree behind him trembled with every movement. I walked past him slowly, my footsteps steady, deliberate, even though my heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. The clock on the mantel ticked louder with every passing second, each click slicing a little deeper into the shrinking space between now and the moment those men returned. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to pick a path that could change everything. I knelt beside Evan, but he didn't lift his head. He was trapped in some internal storm, the kind that doesn't need wind to tear a man apart. "Look at me," I said softly. He shook his head. I can't do this, Dad. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill you. I ruined everything." His voice cracked like thin glass, each word a shard. I grabbed his shoulders, not hard, but firm enough to pull him back into the room. "Evan, stop. Look at me." Slowly, like lifting a weight he couldn't handle, he raised his eyes. They were bloodshot, terrified, but alive. "We don't have time for panic," I said gently. "We need clarity. Right now. You hear me?" He nodded weakly. "Good," I continued. "Now listen to me very carefully. We are not handing them $50,000. We are not opening that door. And we are not sacrificing ourselves." His face twisted in confusion and fear. "Then what? What choice do we have?" I stood and walked to the hallway closet again, not for the wooden box this time, but for something deeper on the top shelf, hidden behind an old blanket Linda used to wrap around her shoulders when winter settled hard. My hand brushed against the cold metal of the object before I pulled it down. A weight. A responsibility. A last resort I had prayed I would never need. When I turned, Evan's eyes widened the moment he saw it. The small black handgun I had kept locked away since the night our neighborhood was broken into 20 years ago. I wasn't a violent man. I never wanted to be. Linda hated the idea of it even being in the house. But I kept it anyway, just in case. For moments like this, moments you hope never come. Evan stood quickly, panic hitting him again. "Dad, no. No, you can't use that. These guys, they'll have guns too. They'll kill you before you even touch the handle." I placed the gun on the table, not pointing at him, not holding it like a threat, just setting it down between us and the danger waiting outside. "I'm not going to shoot anyone unless I have no choice," I said. "But if they force their way in here, I will protect this home. And you." Evan shook his head violently, tears spilling again. "This is my fault. My mess. I'm not letting you die for me." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "You're not deciding that. I am." He grabbed my arm. "Dad, please, listen to me. These men don't bluff. They don't warn unless they mean it. If they come in here and see that gun, it's over. For both of us." I met his eyes. "If we open the door, it's over anyway." He froze, the truth hitting him like cold water. A gust of wind slammed against the house, rattling the windows. Evan flinched hard. I exhaled slowly, trying to gather my thoughts, to piece together something that didn't end with blood in the snow. There had to be another way, some way to stall, to break the pattern, to shift the power just enough. My mind ran through options, escaping through the back, calling the police, driving away, hiding. Each idea fell apart as quickly as it formed. They'd see us. They'd follow. They'd assume betrayal. And betrayal was the one currency men like them never forgave. Evan pressed his palms into his eyes. "Dad, they're coming back. We're running out of time." I looked around the room, the quiet Christmas tree, Linda's picture smiling softly from the mantel, the familiar creaks of the house aging through winters. This home had carried decades of love, loss, arguments, forgiveness. It deserved better than to become a battleground. I reached for the gun and held it low at my side. "We're not opening the door," I said again. "But we're not just waiting either." Evan looked up, confused. "Then what?" I nodded toward the back of the house. "Go to the basement. Turn off every light down there. Stay quiet." His mouth fell open. "What about you?" "I'll stay here," I said. If they break in, they see me, not you." He shook his head, panicked. "Dad, no, please, I can't leave you alone." I put a hand on the side of his face, the same way I used to when he was small and afraid of the dark. "You're not leaving me," I whispered. "You're giving me space to protect you." Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow again. They were early. The footsteps were slower this time, measured, deliberate, the way a predator moves when it already knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Evan froze in place, his eyes widening, breath hitching so sharply it sounded like a choke. "They're early," he whispered, voice cracking. "Dad, they're early." I pressed my finger to my lips, motioning him toward the basement door. He hesitated, torn between fear and the instinct to stay near me, but another crunch of snow pushed him forward. He opened the basement door quietly, the old hinges groaning just faintly before he slipped inside. I waited until his shadow disappeared down the staircase before I pulled the door almost shut, leaving it open just enough so he wouldn't feel completely sealed off in the dark. Then I stepped back into the living room, gun still low at my side, my palm damp against the cold metal. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner, its warm lights flickering like nervous breaths. Linda's ornament swayed gently, probably from the draft creeping through the old window frames. The house felt smaller now, walls drawing in, air tightening, every sound magnified. Another set of footsteps approached, heavier than before, as if someone else had joined the first man. And then, a third. They were all here. All three. My pulse hammered. My father once told me that in moments of real fear, the world doesn't go dark, it goes sharp. And he was right. The sound of each footstep cut through the night like a blade. I walked toward the hallway, positioning myself just out of view of the window near the front door. A shadow passed across the frosted glass, tall and broad. Then another. One of them stepped closer, so close the outline of his face pressed against the thin pane, cheek, jaw, the edge of an eye. "We're back," a voice called out, louder this time, no pretense of politeness left. "And we're done waiting." I didn't answer. Silence was a statement of its own. The man tested the door handle again, harder this time. The lock rattled, reverberating like a warning bell through the house. I placed a hand on the back of the sofa, watching his silhouette against the window's pale glow. "Tell me everything," I said softly. "No more half-truths. No more pieces. All of it." He hesitated, rubbing his palms together. "It started small," he said. "I borrowed a little. Just a little. They promised I could double it. Then triple it. I thought I'd walk away clean." He shook his head. "I didn't realize no one ever walks away from them. Not really." He sank onto the couch finally, elbows on his knees, fingers interlocked so tightly the knuckles went white. "When the deal collapsed, they blamed me. Said I wasted their money. Said I owed them." He took a shaky breath. "I told them I had a backup. A safety net." His eyes flicked up to mine, full of shame. "You." I didn't look away. "And the 50,000. He exhaled, a long, trembling breath. "I took it the night after we had that argument," he admitted quietly. "I came here when you were asleep. I remembered where you kept the key. Mom showed me once, years ago. I told myself I'd pay it back before you even noticed." He rubbed his forehead like the memory itself burned him. "But then everything snowballed. They wanted more. They always want more." He stared at Linda's photo again, his voice thinning to a whisper. "I've been carrying her picture in my wallet," he said. "The one where she's holding me at the lake. I look at it every night, trying to remember the last version of myself she believed in." He pressed his lips together to stop them trembling. "I think that's why I came home. Not for the money. Not at first. I needed to sit in this house again. To feel like I wasn't completely gone." His honesty cut deeper than his lies ever had. I sat beside him, leaving a space between us, and watched the lights of the Christmas tree blink softly, each one reflecting in his wet eyes like tiny, distant hopes. "Evan," I said quietly, "being scared doesn't make you a bad person. But running from your choices does." He nodded slowly. "I know." He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. "I don't expect you to forgive me. His voice cracked. I didn't want to die without at least coming home once. The sentence hit me so hard I had to look away. Outside, the wind grew harsher, sending a hollow moan through the old window panes. It sounded less like weather and more like warning. I forced my voice to remain steady. "We're going to get through tonight," I said. "But you have to stay honest with me. Every detail, every threat, every lie you told them." He nodded without hesitation this time. "I will." A faint sound suddenly echoed from outside, something soft, distant, but real. Evan's head jerked toward the window, his breath catching. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened, heart tightening. Another sound, closer this time, snow crunching beneath deliberate footsteps. Not wind. Not branches. Footsteps. Evan's face went pale as candle wax. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. The first man hadn't left to give up. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the porch, close enough that the sound vibrated through the floorboards like a pulse. Evan backed away from the window instantly, his hands shaking so badly he nearly knocked over the lamp beside him. The soft glow flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls as if the house itself were tensing up, bracing. I raised a hand, signaling him not to speak. The air felt heavier now, thick with the cold that seeped in through the old wooden frame of the door. For a moment, everything went silent, silent in a way that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Evan moved closer to me, not touching, but hovering like a frightened child desperate for protection without the courage to ask for it. He leaned in, whispering so low I barely caught the words. "Dad, it's them. I know it's them." I put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. His bones felt sharp under my palm, like fear had hollowed him out from the inside. Another step sounded on the porch. Slow. Deliberate. Snow crunching under a heavy boot. Then another. And another. I walked toward the door with calm, controlled steps, not because I wasn't afraid, God knows I was, but because panic would only make things worse. My father used to say fear is like smoke. If you let it fill the room, no one can breathe. I kept that in my mind as I reached the front hallway. A soft thud hit the porch, like someone brushing snow off their boots. Then a low voice, muffled through the wood, opened the door. Not shouted. Not angry. Calm. Too calm. Evan pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he crouched near the floor, his hands gripping his hair. He looked like he might pass out. I didn't move to open the door. "Leave," I said firmly. "We already talked." There was a short silence, then a faint chuckle, the kind a man makes when he hears something amusing and dangerous at the same time. "We weren't finished," the voice said. "And you didn't let us explain the situation properly." Footsteps shifted. I could picture them out there, maybe 2 or 3 men now, standing just beyond the frame where the porch light cast its weak yellow circle. I adjusted my stance, planting my feet. "There's nothing to explain," I replied. "You need to go." A slow breath came from the other side of the door, fogging the tiny pane of glass near the top. "Sir," the voice said, "you don't want this to turn into a different kind of night." The words slid under my skin like ice. Evan let out a small strangled noise, muffled behind his hands. I stepped closer to the door and lowered my voice. "My son made a mistake. He's going to make it right, but not tonight, and not like this." The man outside paused, considering. "He doesn't have the money," he said flatly. "We know that. Which means someone else does." The implication hung heavy between us. I felt something shift inside me, a line being crossed. "I'm not giving you a cent," I said. "Not from me. Not from my wife's savings. Not from this house." The porch creaked, as if someone leaned forward. "You're making a dangerous choice." "No," I said calmly. "I'm making the only choice." For a beat, the world outside went quiet again, nothing but wind moving between the snowdrifts. Then the doorknob rattled, just once, testing. Evan gasped, covering his mouth. I took a step forward, standing directly between the door and my son. "Try that again," I said, "and we have a different problem." A long silence followed. Then the man outside let out a sigh, one that sounded almost disappointed. "You're protecting someone who wouldn't do the same for you," he said. The words were meant as a knife, but they landed differently. Not because they were wrong, but because they weren't entirely right either. "Maybe," I said, "but he's still my son." The man murmured something to someone else, low, quick, and then Bootsteps shifted away from the door. For a moment, I felt hope spike inside me. Maybe they were leaving. Maybe they were giving up. Evan lifted his head slightly, desperate for any sign of mercy. "Evan," I said softly, "I can't promise you what you want." His head snapped up, panic blooming instantly. "Dad, please." "But," I continued, raising a hand to stop him, "I can promise you something else." He blinked, confused, breath trembling. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the carpet where sunlight once danced during better days. "This ends tonight. One way or another." His lips parted. "What does that mean?" I looked at him, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been all night. "It means I'm not running. And neither are you." Evan swallowed hard, fear swirling in his eyes. "They won't just walk away." "No," I said quietly. "They won't." A long silence stretched between us, thick as the snow outside. Then he whispered, barely audible, "Dad, what are we going to do?" I stared at the dark window, watched the shadows shifting in the yard, and felt a certainty settle into my bones. "We're going to face whatever comes to that door." Evan stared at me like he couldn't decide whether I was brave or insane, his breathing shallow, his chest rising in quick, uneven bursts as if each inhale scraped his ribs from the inside. The clock on the mantel ticked louder than it should have, filling the room with a slow, relentless counting of seconds that felt like someone measuring the distance between us and whatever danger waited outside. I stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the yard. Snow swirled in thick sheets, wind carving small paths through the drifts that reached almost to the porch steps. The world looked quiet, peaceful even, but somewhere out there, hidden behind a curtain of snow, were three men who didn't care about Christmas, or families, or second chances. They cared about debt. They cared about control. They cared about fear. And tonight, all of that had my son's name written on it. Evan rose from the couch, unsteady, rubbing his arms as though the chill came from inside, not the air. "Dad, you don't understand these guys," he said, voice trembling. "They don't talk things out. They don't negotiate. They don't leave until they get what they want." I turned to him slowly. "Then we don't give them what they want," I said. He blinked hard, as if the words confused him. "You think they'll just walk away without the money? They won't." I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "Maybe not tonight. But they won't get it from you. Or from me. Not anymore." He shook his head rapidly, pacing again, raking his fingers through his hair. "Dad, please, please don't do this tough guy thing. I know you. You're trying to protect me, but this isn't like when I was a kid. You can't stand in the doorway and make the monsters go away." I swallowed hard, feeling the truth of his words, but also knowing something he didn't. I wasn't the same man I'd been back then. Grief had changed me. Losing Linda had carved out pieces of me that would never grow back. But it also left behind a hardness, a quiet strength I didn't know I had until tonight. I gently set Linda's ornament back on the table, the glass globe catching the warm glow of the tree lights. Evan watched my hands, his expression tightening. "Dad, what are you planning?" he whispered. Instead of answering, I walked to the hall closet and opened it, pulling out an old wooden box. The hinges creaked softly. Linda used to tease me about never fixing small things. I set the box on the table and opened the lid. Inside lay a stack of old paperwork, a lifetime of saved receipts, one faded Polaroid of Evan at 7 years old holding a sparkler in the summer dusk, and beneath it, a set of folded documents I hadn't touched since Linda died. My emergency stash. Not money. Not comfort. Papers I never wanted to need. "What's that?" Evan asked, anxiety sharpening his voice. "Just something I should have used earlier," I said. I sifted through the papers until I found the one I was looking for, a document I'd prepared years ago when Linda's health started to decline. A plan. A safeguard. Not for money. For protection. Evan stepped closer, eyes scanning my face for answers. "Dad," he whispered, "are you calling the cops?" I paused, the paper still between my fingers. "Do you want the truth?" He nodded slowly. "I don't know," I said. "Not yet." His face contorted in fear. "If you call the police, they'll think I ratted. They'll kill me." I squeezed the edge of the table, steadying myself. "Then we won't call. Not now." He let out a shaky breath of relief, but it didn't last. I looked at him with a seriousness he hadn't seen from me before. "But if they come back," I continued, "and force their way in, I won't hesitate." Evan's eyes widened, panic flickering again. "Dad, no, please, these aren't people you can threaten." I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not threatening anyone," I said. "I'm protecting my home. And my son. Even if he's made mistakes." He stared at me for a long moment, torn between fear and something like gratitude. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. The windows rattled suddenly from a burst of wind, or something else. I glanced toward the door, the shadows shifting across the floor. "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." The house went still again, that eerie kind of stillness where even the furnace seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Evan drifted toward the living room window, peeking through a narrow slit between the curtains as though the snow outside might suddenly shape itself into the men he feared. His shoulders hunched, his hands pressed flat against the wall for balance. "I don't see anyone," he whispered, but the tremor in his voice made it clear. He didn't trust the quiet. "Not tonight." I closed the box on the table, sliding the papers back into place, and tucked it beneath the coffee table. I wasn't relying on them yet, not until I had to. For now, my focus was Evan, the way he kept flinching at every gust of wind, at every creak from the old house settling in the cold. "Sit down," I said gently. He shook his head as if sitting would make him too exposed, too vulnerable. I can't just sit. They might come back. They always come back." His breathing quickened, becoming shallow, almost frantic. I walked to him slowly, keeping my movements calm, grounding. "Evan," I said, "you're safe here." He let out a small, broken laugh. "I used to think that," he whispered. "Back when Mom was alive. Back when I didn't ruin everything." He stepped back from the window, wrapping his arms around himself as if trying to hold the pieces of his life together. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door," he said. "I wanted to fix it before you ever knew. But everything I touched this year, it just fell apart." Evan backed into the living room like he was afraid the walls themselves might close in on him. His breath came fast and uneven, fogging the air as if the cold from outside had followed him in. I watched him collapse onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, elbows shaking. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand still on the doorknob, feeling the echo of that man's voice vibrating through the wood. The house that once held warmth, laughter, and Linda's soft humming now felt like a thin shell, too fragile to hold the weight of the danger sitting in my living room. I stepped away from the door slowly, every instinct telling me to stay calm, to keep my voice steady, because if I cracked even a little, Evan would shatter completely. "Who was he?" I asked quietly. Evan didn't answer. Not at first. He dragged his fingers down his face, leaving red streaks on his cheeks from the pressure. "One of them," he whispered, voice raw. "There are two others. They usually come together." He paused, eyes glazed. "If he's here, the others aren't far." I sat down across from him, the same chair where Linda used to fold laundry, where she'd sit and talk about her day while Evan played on the rug. Now it felt like a witness seat. "What exactly do they want from you?" I asked. Evan let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "You already know," he said. "Money. The money I owe. They think I still have it. Or that I can get it." His voice thinned. "And they don't care how." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "How did you get involved with them in the first place?" He closed his eyes, leaning back like the memory itself hurt. "Stupid," he whispered. "I was stupid and desperate. After Mom died, I was drinking too much, spending too much, trying to feel something other than empty. These guys, they show up where the lonely people go. Bars. Back rooms. They make promises that sound like second chances." He swallowed hard. "I thought I was smart enough to handle it. I wasn't." The Christmas lights flickered softly, throwing patterns across his exhausted face. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit, like the world had taken pieces of him and left only the edges. "You said they blamed you for the deal going bad," I said. "Did you do something to cause it?" He rubbed his eyes again, exhaustion dragging at his movements. "I didn't vet the buyer. Didn't double-check the paperwork. Didn't see the red flags." He shook his head slowly. "I was in over my head before I even started. And when it all collapsed, they turned on me." He looked up at me, eyes wide, filled with a fear that came from knowing he was right to be afraid. "Dad, they don't ask twice. They don't forgive. And if they came here tonight, it means time's up." For a moment, the only sound in the house was the faint ticking of the clock hanging above the mantel. Evan's gaze drifted to Linda's glasses again, the thin wire frames still resting exactly where she left them. "She'd be ashamed of me," he whispered. "No," I said, though my voice wavered. "She'd be heartbroken, not ashamed." He nodded slowly, shoulders curling inward as if he wished he could disappear into himself. "I tried to fix it," he said. "I tried everything. I sold my tools. My car's 3 months behind. I skipped meals. I sold the watch Mom gave me. But nothing made a dent in what I owe." He pressed his palms together, shaking. "And now I dragged you into it." I exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest like a stone sinking in water. "Evan," I said quietly, "you need to understand something. You crossed a line when you took that money. A line you can't undo with apologies." He flinched but nodded. "I know. But you're still my son," I said. "And I'm not letting anyone hurt you. Not in my home." His eyes widened, a fragile hope flickering through them like a candle fighting wind. "So you'll help me," he whispered. I didn't answer right away. Because help wasn't a simple promise anymore. Not with men like the one at my door. Not with $25,000 hanging like a noose over his head. And not with the last remnants of Linda's gift already stolen. Instead, I asked the question that mattered more than any number on a debt sheet. "Evan, what exactly did you tell them about me?" Evan froze when I asked the question, like every muscle in his body locked at the same time. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, and for a few seconds he just stared at me, wide-eyed, cornered, guilty. The kind of look you give when someone finally touches the nerve you've been hiding behind every excuse. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing like each word hurt going down. "Dad, I didn't want to involve you," he whispered. "That wasn't the plan." He ran a shaky hand through his hair, pacing a small, frantic circle in front of the coffee table. "I never meant for them to know who you were." He stopped pacing, standing still but trembling. "But when everything went bad, when they started asking questions, I panicked. A cold heaviness sank into my stomach." "Evan," I said slowly, "what did you tell them?" He pressed both hands against his face, dragging them down until his eyes appeared, wet, frantic, desperate. "I told them I had someone who could help," he said, voice cracking. "I told them you had savings, that you had money tucked away, that you were good for it." He winced at his own confession. "I thought it would buy me time. Just time. A week, maybe 2. I thought I'd figure something out before they ever came near you." My jaw tightened until it ached. "So you made me your collateral." His head dropped. No, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" I asked. "Because that's exactly what it sounds like." He stumbled backward onto the couch, sinking into the cushions like the truth had weight. "I was drowning," he whispered. "I didn't know what else to do. Every day they were calling, threatening, showing up at my job. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe." He looked up at me with shattered eyes. "Dad, I was scared. I was so scared. And when people get that scared, they say things, they promise things. They drag good people down with them just to keep their head above the water." He wiped his face roughly. "I used your name because it was the only thing I had left to give." I turned away, pacing toward the mantel where Linda's photo rested. Her eyes in that picture were warm, steady, knowing. I remembered the night she made me promise I'd take care of Evan. But taking care of someone didn't mean letting them destroy you. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet truth whispered, she would never want this for either of us. I pressed my palm against the mantel to steady myself. Evan, I said without looking at him, do they think I'm going to pay what you owe? Behind me, I heard him take a trembling breath. Yes, he whispered. I told them I'd talk to you tonight. That you'd help. That you always help. His voice cracked into a whimper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I turned slowly. And if I don't? His face went pale. They'll come back, he said. Not just one of them. All three. He rubbed his shaking hands together like he could warm away his fear. They don't care if it's Christmas. They don't care that you're my father. They care about money. That's it. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Please, Dad. Please don't let them come back. I sat beside him, not close enough to comfort, not far enough to abandon him. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping across the floor, and walked to the far side of the kitchen. Not to get away from him, but to get away from the feeling rising inside me, the one that made me want to say yes just to keep him breathing. I gripped the edge of the counter. Evan, I can't just write a check for that much money. My voice cracked, but I didn't hide it. Even if I wanted to. Even if I ignored everything you've done. Even if I threw away every warning sign your mother ever whispered to me. He stood too, desperation flaring in his eyes. Dad, please, listen. I am listening, I said, turning toward him. I've been listening your whole life. Through every mistake, every lie, every apology that never had time to stay true. He took a step back as if the words were pushing him. This isn't like before, he said, breath trembling. This isn't a mistake I can fix on my own. He pointed to his chest with a shaking hand. They're not bluffing. They're not the type. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The fridge hummed behind me. The snow kept tapping the windows, a soft reminder of a world that continued whether we broke or not. Evan, I said slowly, you took something that didn't belong to you. You took your mother's last blessing. You forged my name. And now you're asking me to save you from the consequences of stealing from us. He winced like I'd struck him. I know, he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice, shaking. I know. I screwed everything up. I destroyed everything. But please, if you don't help me, I won't make it to next year. For a moment, I saw the little boy he once was, the one who used to run barefoot through the yard chasing fireflies, the one Linda used to hold when storms frightened him, the one I still believed somewhere existed beneath the rubble of the man standing before me. But then I remembered Linda's last warning, whispered with a breath that barely reached her lips, "Don't lose yourself trying to save him." And for the first time, I wondered if saving Evan had already cost me too much. He wiped his face again, breathing hard, waiting for an answer that might decide his fate. But before I could speak, the doorbell rang. A sharp, unexpected sound. Too late. Too cold. Too wrong for Christmas Eve. For a second, neither of us moved. The sound sliced through the house, one sharp, echoing chime that didn't belong in the quiet of Christmas Eve. Evan's head snapped toward the front door, his eyes widening, panic flooding every corner of his face. He whispered something under his breath, too soft to catch, too terrified to mistake. I felt the hair on my arms rise. Nobody ever came here unannounced. Not neighbors, not friends, not anyone. The world outside was buried in snow. No one should have been at my doorstep tonight. Evan, I said carefully, are you expecting someone? His breath shuddered. No, he whispered, but the fear in his voice told me that wasn't the truth. Not fully. Not anymore. I walked toward the front hall slowly, each step sending a pulse of warning through my chest. The house felt colder with every movement, as if the walls themselves were bracing for something. Evan stayed behind me, but close, too close, like a shadow trying to hide behind the person casting it. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The porch light flickered once, twice, throwing our reflections across the small window pane, me stiff and still, him trembling behind me. I took a breath and cracked the door open just enough to see out. At first, there was nothing but the swirl of snow under the yellow porch light. Then a figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark winter coat zipped up to the neck. His breath steamed in the cold air, his hands buried in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Evening," the man said, his tone too polite, too calm. "Sorry to bother you this late." His voice had that smoothness people use when they're hiding a blade behind their back. I didn't open the door any wider. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man's eyes flicked past me, just for a fraction of a second, to where Evan's shadow hovered. It was enough. "We're looking for someone," he said casually. "Young guy. Brown hair. About ye high." He gestured with a gloved hand. "Goes by Evan." The way he said the name made my stomach drop. I felt Evan stiffen behind me, heard the air hitch in his throat. "Who's asking?" I said, keeping my voice level. The man smiled, cold, thin, practiced. "Friends," he replied. "Just need to talk to him about a little business matter." I didn't move. Neither did he. The snow fell between us like a curtain, muffling the world. "No one here by that name," I lied. Evan's hand gripped the back of my shirt, desperate, terrified. The man's smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Now that's interesting," he said softly. "Because his car's parked at the end of your driveway." He leaned slightly to the side, looking past me again. "And because he owes us a conversation." His tone darkened. "A long one." Evan made a small sound behind me, a choked, helpless noise that cut through me like ice. I stepped forward just enough to block the doorway completely. "Leave," I said. A simple word. Firm, steady. The man tilted his head, as if amused. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "It concerns whoever comes to my house," I replied. He let out a slow breath, fog spilling from his mouth in a thick cloud. "Look," he said, "we don't want trouble tonight. It's Christmas. We're just here to remind your boy he's got responsibilities." He paused. "Debts." I kept my eyes locked on him. "He's not coming out." His smile vanished. "That's so." I didn't blink. Not once. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders, melting slowly, the only movement in a moment stretched too thin. Finally, he stepped back. "All right," he said quietly. "Have it your way." But the way he said it didn't sound like retreat. It sounded like promise. He turned and walked into the snow, disappearing into the night like a shadow swallowed by wind. When I shut the door, the silence hit me first. Then Evan. He grabbed my arm, almost collapsing into me. "Dad, you shouldn't have done that," he whispered, voice cracking. "You don't know these guys." I looked at him, really looked at him, the shaking hands, the ashen face, the boy terrified inside the man. "Sit down," I said, my voice low. "We're not finished." He stared at me with eyes full of fear, not of those men. Of what I would say next. "Why not just ask?" He let out a broken laugh, hollow and sharp. "Because I knew what you'd say." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his sweater. "You would have told me no. You would have tried to talk sense into me. And I didn't want sense. I wanted a miracle." His voice dropped. "And I stole it from the only place I felt safe enough to look." The words hit harder than any scream could have. Safe enough to steal from. Safe enough to break. Safe enough to betray. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding down the sides of his face. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve help. But I came home because—" His voice shook, cracking open. "Because I'm scared, Dad. I'm so damn scared." He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes wide, red, desperate. "Please, please tell me you can help me." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for rescue. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I could give him either. I didn't answer him right away. I couldn't. My tongue felt heavy, my mind louder than the ticking clock on the wall. Evan's plea echoed through the room, through my ribs, through every place in me where love and disappointment had been wrestling for years. He sat hunched at the table, head bowed, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white, waiting for a lifeline I wasn't sure I had left to give. The snow outside thickened, swirling across the windows like a curtain closing on the life I thought we still had. I walked past him slowly, each step a negotiation with myself, and stood by the sink, staring at the single cup left from dinner. Linda's cup. Chipped, worn, still carrying the faint stain of her last tea. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes darker. I thought of the day Linda's insurance came, how she had whispered with a weak smile, "Use this to live again. Promise me you will." And I had promised, not knowing the promise would be broken by our own son. Behind me, Evan wiped his face with both hands, trying to pull himself together. "Dad, say something," he said, voice hoarse, almost childlike. I turned, leaning on the counter to keep from shaking. "Evan," I said slowly, "you didn't come home for Christmas." His eyes flickered with panic. "I did," he insisted, too quickly. "I wanted to see you." "No," I said, cutting gently but firmly through the excuse. "You came because you're out of options." His breath hitched, shoulders sagging like the truth itself was too heavy to stand under. "I came because I didn't know who else," his voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because we both knew how it ended. "Who else would you use? Who else would you take from?" I walked back to the table and sat across from him. He looked up slowly, eyes swollen, terrified. "You want $25,000, I said. He flinched like the number itself was a blade. "I know how it sounds," I said, "like you're asking me to sacrifice what little I have left." He swallowed, jaw trembling. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death." That was the moment his voice cracked, not from fear of those men, but from fear of losing me. "Dad," he whispered, leaning forward, "they said if I don't pay, they'll come after me. They'll ruin me. They'll ruin everything." He paused, breath shaking. "I just need one more chance." The words felt like déjà vu. I'd heard versions of them before, smaller, gentler, wrapped in teenage excuses or young adult recklessness. But this was different. This wasn't a broken vase or a missed shift at work. This was a man drowning under the weight of his own choices, reaching for the closest person to drag down with him. I exhaled slowly, staring at the table, at the faint scratch marks from years of family dinners. "And what happens after that?" I asked quietly. Evan blinked. "After what?" "After I give you the money. After you pay them. Then what?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, no answer ready. "You think this ends at 25? I asked. "It never ends with men like that." His breathing grew ragged. "I'll be better," he insisted. "I'll change." "You said that before," I reminded him, though the softness in my tone kept it from sounding cruel. "You said it to your mother the night she found out about the first debt. You said it to me when you dropped out of school. You've said it more times than I can count." His face crumpled, and he wiped it quickly as if it were shameful to be seen breaking. "I'm not lying this time," he whispered. "I swear on Mom." I snapped my head up sharply. "Don't," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. The room froze. Evan swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle. When I opened them again, he was staring at me with the kind of fear that comes from realizing love has limits. Fragile ones. Breakable ones. Ones he might have crossed too many times already. But before I could speak, he whispered the words I'd been dreading, the ones that slipped into the room like a cold draft that extinguished whatever warmth was left. "Dad, if you don't help me, I don't think I'm going to make it." His words didn't just land. They hit, sharp and heavy, shaking something deep inside me I'd kept guarded for years. He sat there with his head bowed, shoulders trembling, as if he'd just confessed a sentence instead of a plea. The air in the room shifted, colder than the snow outside, colder than the quiet that fell over us. I pulled out the chair beside him and sat slowly, feeling every inch of my age settle into my bones. "Evan," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady, because someone had to stay steady tonight, "look at me." He didn't. Not right away. He rubbed his palms over his face, wiped tears onto the sleeves of his sweater, and finally lifted his eyes. They were red, raw, a child's fear inside a man's face. "I'm serious," he whispered. "Those people, they don't give warnings twice." His throat tightened. "And after everything, after losing Mom, after failing at everything, His breath caught like a sob he was too ashamed to let out. "I don't have anything left, Dad." I felt my jaw clench, but not out of anger, out of a heartbreak too old and too familiar. The kind that builds slowly over years of watching someone you love walk into fire after fire, thinking this time they won't get burned. I rested my hands on the table, fingers curled, holding back the storm building inside me. "There's always something left," I said quietly. "Even at your lowest." He shook his head. "Not for me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was afraid the world might split open beneath him. "I'm tired," he said. "I'm so tired. And I'm scared all the time. Every day feels like it's closing in." He pressed his palms together tightly. "I thought coming home might save me." Home. This place. This quiet, shadowed house that still smelled like Linda when the heat kicked on. Home wasn't supposed to be a lifeline tied around someone's neck. This wasn't the fear of a son facing his father. It was the fear of a man cornered by consequences he couldn't outrun. "Everyone makes mistakes," I said slowly. "But running from them doesn't erase them, Evan." He let out a shaky laugh, hollow and sharp. "Yeah, well, some mistakes run back at you." He walked past me toward the kitchen, opening cabinets he didn't need to open, pretending to look for a cup just to keep his hands busy. "Dad," he said finally, gripping the edge of the counter like he might collapse. "If I told you something important, would you promise not to freak out?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Evan," I said gently, "just say it." He stared at his reflection in the microwave door, as if the truth might look kinder there. "I'm in trouble," he said. "Serious trouble." He didn't look at me, didn't breathe properly, didn't blink. And I didn't know where else to go. He swallowed hard, his next words clinging to the air like frost. Cold, fragile, impossible to take back. "Dad, I need help." He didn't look at me when he said it. He just stood there gripping the counter like the kitchen was rocking beneath him, like the floor might give out if he loosened his hands even a little. The wind outside howled against the siding, and for a moment the whole house felt like it was exhaling with him, long, tired, resigned. I walked closer but kept a few feet of space between us, not wanting to corner him, not wanting to scare him back into silence. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice steady, though something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. He let out a slow, shaky breath, staring into the half-open cabinet as if answers might be hiding between cups and old boxes of tea. "The kind you can't just walk away from," he whispered. His hands moved to his pockets, then out again, then back, restless, twitching, like he couldn't decide what to do with them. "I messed up, Dad. Really messed up." His voice had a tremor to it, thin and frayed like an old wire about to snap. I leaned against the opposite counter, giving him room. "Tell me," I said. "Whatever it is, just say it." He shook his head quickly. "You'll hate me," he muttered. "You'll never look at me the same." The words carved into the space between us, and I felt something inside me shift. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "I'm still your father," I said softly. "Just talk to me." He laughed bitterly at that, a sound too sharp, too broken. "Yeah, that's kind of the problem," he murmured. He stepped away from the counter and paced again, running his hands through his hair, breathing shallow, uneven breaths. "It started months ago," he said, each word landing like a stone. "After Mom died. I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't working. I wasn't doing anything. My life just," he snapped his fingers weakly, "fell apart." His eyes glistened, but he blinked fast to hide it. "I got mixed up with some guys. People who promised quick money." My chest tightened. I'd heard that tone before, years ago, when he'd come home from high school with bruised knuckles and a story that never added up. "What kind of people?" I asked. He hesitated, chewing his bottom lip. "The kind Mom would have told me to stay the hell away from," he said quietly. "The kind who don't forgive debt." He turned his back to me and leaned against the sink, gripping its edges. "I made a deal. A stupid deal. A real estate flip, some fast return crap. They said it was safe. Said everyone wins." His shoulders rose and fell. Everyone except the idiot who believed them. The kitchen felt smaller with every sentence he spoke. "How much?" I asked gently. "How much did you lose?" He didn't answer. He stared down at the sink, jaw clenched, throat tight. "Evan," I said, "just tell me." He inhaled sharply, the sound thin and cracked. "Everything," he whispered. "All of it." He finally turned around, and the truth was written across his face, raw, terrified, ashamed. "Dad, the 50,000, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the bank. It wasn't some glitch." My heart stopped. My breath froze. He took one unsteady step toward me. "It was me," he said, voice trembling. "I took Mom's money." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The words hung in the air between us like the smoke that used to rise from Linda's winter candles. Thick, suffocating, impossible to breathe through. I felt the floor shift under me, not literally, but in that way a life shifts when a truth finally reveals itself. Evan stood there trembling, his chest rising and falling too fast, like he expected me to explode, or collapse, or throw him out into the snow. But I didn't do any of those things. I just stared at him, my hands cold, my throat tight, my voice lost somewhere between anger and heartbreak. "You took it," I finally said, the words slow, quiet, steady. He nodded once, barely. "I didn't mean," he started, but the lie wilted halfway out of his mouth, and he shut his eyes in shame. "No," he whispered. "I meant it. I told myself I had no choice, but I did. I always did." He sank into a chair like the weight of the confession pulled his legs out from under him. His fingers dug into his hair, elbows on the table, his breath shallow. "Dad, I knew her password. She told me once, months before she died, when she thought she might forget it." His voice fractured. "I told myself she wouldn't want the money to just sit there. I told myself she'd want me to have a fresh start. I lied to myself so hard I started believing it." I stood a few feet away, unable to sit, unable to move, feeling a slow burning grief spread inside me. Not the quick heat of anger, but the deep, heavy ache of betrayal that grows roots. "That money wasn't for a fresh start," I said quietly. "It was her last gift to us." Evan squeezed his eyes shut, tears slipping through despite his attempts to hide them. "I know," he whispered. "God, I know. I hate myself for it. I hate what I did. But I was drowning, Dad. And when people are drowning, they grab whatever they can." I took a step back, leaning against the counter to keep myself steady. "And now?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Now I'm in deeper," he said. "Those guys, they want the money back. Every cent." His voice dropped to a shaking whisper. "And if I don't pay them, they're coming after me." The kitchen grew cold, colder than the winter wind, colder than the snow beating against the windows. "How much do you owe?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm himself from the inside. 50 wasn't enough," he said. "The deal went bad. They blamed me. They said I ruined it. They want 25 more by New Year's." He lifted his eyes to mine, pleading, raw. "Dad, I didn't know who else to turn to." I felt my breath leave my chest like someone had pushed it out. 25,000. More than I had. More than I could get. More than I ever should give. "Evan," I said slowly, "why didn't you come to me before you took it? Why steal it?" I stayed by the tree, my hands resting on the back of the couch, pretending I wasn't listening to every breath coming from the hallway. The branches trembled slightly as the heater clicked on, but it could have just as easily been my own pulse shaking through me. I heard the softest creak, Evan easing the office door open, slow and careful, like a man entering a room filled with landmines he already knew the location of. I didn't move. Didn't call out. Sometimes silence tells you more than confrontation ever could. The seconds stretched, long and thin, until I heard the faint shuffle of him stepping inside, then the metallic whisper of the drawer sliding open. He wasn't even pretending to use the bathroom anymore. He was searching. And he knew exactly what he was searching for. I walked to the hallway slowly, quietly, each step controlled. When I reached the corner, I stopped where I couldn't be seen. Evan's shadow flickered under the office door, long and uncertain, moving back and forth like someone digging through guilt. I could hear paper rustling, then a sharp inhale as he found whatever he was looking for. My jaw tightened. I could picture him standing there, holding the bank statement with my forged signature on it. His signature, really, written with my name. The proof of what he'd taken. Linda's life insurance, the money she had told me with a weak smile to use to enjoy life again someday. A promise I'd made to protect, a promise he'd broken before it even had time to breathe. The drawer closed too fast, and I heard him mutter something under his breath. Fear, frustration, maybe shame, though I doubted he knew the shape of that feeling anymore. I stepped back into the living room just before he opened the door. He walked down the hallway, breath uneven, the color drained from his face like he'd seen a ghost. When he entered the room, he tried to look surprised, casual even. "Bathroom's freezing," he said with a weak chuckle. "You should get that fixed." I nodded, pretending not to notice the way his hand trembled as he smoothed his hair. "I'll look into it," I said. He moved to the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard, shoulders rising and falling too fast. "Dad, can I ask you something?" he said, voice low. But he didn't turn around. Didn't want me to see the fear in his eyes. "Sure," I answered. He swallowed hard, watching the snow swirl under the porch light. "Do you ever miss having money around? I mean, like savings?" The question came out too gently, too carefully. I felt the truth slip into the room like a draft under the door. This wasn't about curiosity. This was preparation. He was warming up to something, shaping his next lie. "I get by," I said. "Why?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Just wondering. You know, life gets expensive. And you're not getting younger." There it was, the edge of desperation, the crack in his voice he tried to hide. "Everybody needs a safety net, right?" he added. The words were soft, but the intention behind them was sharp enough to cut skin. "Do you have a safety net?" I asked quietly. He froze. Completely. Like the question hit a nerve he wasn't ready to expose. "Working on it," he whispered. He finally turned toward me, eyes glossy, jaw clenched. "Dad, I might need... He stopped himself. The sentence died in the air between us. He rubbed his palms together, pacing in a tight circle. "Forget it. I'll figure it out." He said it fast, too fast, like he wanted to grab the words and shove them back down his throat. But the truth was already out. The fear, the need, the danger. All of it lived in the tremble of his hands and the way his chest rose too quickly, like he couldn't get enough air. I watched him carefully, feeling the same heaviness in my bones I'd felt the day Linda whispered her last warning about him. "Don't let him drown you with him." Back then, I didn't listen. Tonight, standing in that dim living room with the snow beating softly on the windows, I realized she might have been trying to save me from a moment exactly like this one. Evan paced the living room like a man walking inside his own storm, every step sharper than the last, his fingers twitching the way they used to when he was caught lying as a kid. I stayed quiet, letting the moment stretch, letting him wrestle with whatever truth he was trying to bury under shaky breaths and forced composure. The Christmas lights flickered faintly on the tree, casting shadows across his face, small, broken pieces of him shifting with each nervous turn. He kept glancing at the office door, then at me, then back again, like he was checking whether I'd noticed what he'd done. I had. But I wasn't ready to say the words out loud. Sometimes a truth becomes real only when spoken, and I wasn't ready for this one to be real. Not yet. He stopped pacing and stood in front of the fireplace, staring at Linda's framed photo resting above the mantel. His throat contracted as he swallowed, and he whispered, so low I almost missed it, "She'd hate who I've become." The admission hit the room like a soft explosion, quiet but irreversible. I didn't move toward him, didn't put a hand on his shoulder. I'd done that too many times before, thinking comfort could fix damage that was rooted in choices he kept making. "You're still her son," I said, my voice steady. "That hasn't changed." He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. "It has, Dad. You just don't want to see it." He moved away from the fireplace as if her photo was judging him. Maybe it was. Maybe he felt the weight of every Christmas he missed, every phone call ignored, every lie told to a father who kept forgiving him out of habit, not hope. He walked back to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass, the frost leaving a faint imprint on his skin. "I'm trying," he murmured. "You have to believe me." I'm trying to fix things. His voice cracked at the last word, a thin fracture spreading through him. Fix what? I asked. His shoulders tensed. He didn't answer. Instead, he wiped the fog from the window with the sleeve of his sweater, his hand trembling so much he had to steady it with the other. Life, Dad, he said finally. Everything. All of it. He turned around abruptly, walking toward the hallway again before circling back as if he didn't trust his own legs. His restlessness filled the room like static. I watched him struggle with himself, watched him collect pieces of courage only to drop them again. He opened his mouth 3 times, started a sentence, then shut it like he was afraid of what would come out. You ever feel like you're one mistake away from losing everything? He asked, voice low. Just one. His eyes met mine, and for the first time that night, I saw the terror underneath the scrambled excuses and half-truths. Evan followed the smell of dinner into the kitchen, moving slowly, like every step brought back a memory he wasn't sure he wanted. I stood by the counter pretending to check the pyrgus again, even though they were already plated, steam curling upward like the last warm breath of the house. He lingered near the doorway, rubbing his hands together as if trying to shake off the cold, or something else clinging to him. When he finally stepped inside, he looked at the stove, then at the small wooden cutting board Linda used to swear she'd replace but never did. You even made her pyrgus, he said softly. Yeah, I replied, keeping my back to him. You always loved them. There was a pause, then a faint laugh, bitter and small. Loved them because she made them, he said, and for a moment his voice cracked open enough for me to hear the boy he used to be. But the moment closed quickly, sealed shut by the man he had become. He walked around the kitchen the way you walk through a museum of your own mistakes, touching nothing, remembering everything. His eyes landed on a mug on the counter, a simple white cup with a chipped handle. Linda's favorite. He picked it up, thumb brushing the crack as though it were a wound. I thought you'd have thrown this out, he murmured. I thought you would have asked me to, I answered. He didn't respond. He just set the mug down carefully, almost gently, then stepped back like it might burn him. I noticed how his gaze kept drifting to the hallway, to my office door. A small movement, barely noticeable, but enough to twist something inside me. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. So, how've you been, Dad? A simple question. Too simple. He never asked simple things. He avoided them because simple questions required honest answers. I've been surviving, I said. Doing what I can. He nodded, but his eyes didn't meet mine. They were fixed on the corner of the counter where a small stack of unopened mail sat, bills, circulars, and one letter with a government stamp. Not the envelope from the dining table, but something close enough that I saw his jaw tighten. He quickly looked away. You know, I almost didn't come, he said suddenly. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. He shrugged. I didn't know if you'd want me here. I turned, finally facing him. You're my son, I said quietly. Wanting you here was never the problem. His expression flickered with something raw, something almost like shame, but he swallowed it down before it could surface. Yeah, well, people change, he muttered, stepping back as if distance could protect him from the truth. I watched him pretend to admire the Christmas lights hanging across the kitchen window, but his reflection in the glass told a different story. His eyes weren't on the lights, they were drifting toward the hallway again. Toward the office. Toward the drawer where the documents were. The same drawer I'd kept locked for years but somehow found open when I woke up 2 weeks ago. A detail I hadn't let myself think about until now. A detail that should have terrified me. Instead, it just made my heart beat slower, heavier, like it already knew the ending of a story I'd refused to read. You hungry? I asked. Evan nodded too quickly. We sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising from the plates between us. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Almost. But then he pushed food around without taking a bite, fingers tapping his thigh restlessly. Dad, he said, voice low. Can I ask you something? He didn't finish the question. He didn't have to. The tension in his shoulders, the way he glanced toward the office, the way he swallowed like his throat was too tight, all of it told me the question wasn't new. He'd been carrying it all the way here. Carrying it long before tonight. Carrying it like a debt. The kind that destroys a man long before it's due. He didn't ask the question, not yet. He just sat there, staring at the Pyragus like they were some kind of test he wasn't prepared for, his fork motionless in his hand. The kitchen felt smaller than it ever had, the hum of the refrigerator loud enough to fill the silence he was too afraid to break. Outside, the snow tapped against the window in soft, uneven rhythms, like someone knocking gently, then stopping, then knocking again. Evan's foot bounced under the table, a nervous habit he had when he was younger, back when he used to sit here doing homework while Linda cooked. I watched him breathe in, then out, trying to steady himself. He pushed his plate slightly forward, untouched. "Dad, you know I wouldn't be here unless—" He looked away, jaw tightening. "Unless," I said quietly. His shoulders slumped the slightest bit, but instead of answering, he shook his head. "Never mind. Forget it." He forced a smile that didn't belong on his face. Not tonight, not with the weight he carried. I took a bite of food, even though I wasn't hungry either. "You used to eat 6 of these before you'd even let them cool," I said softly. Evan let out a small huff of a laugh. "Yeah. Mom would yell every time I burned my mouth." His voice wavered on the word mom, and for a second, something real cracked through him. He rubbed his eyes with his thumb and index finger, trying to hide the shine gathering there. "I miss her," he whispered. It was the first honest thing he'd said tonight. I nodded, my throat tightening. "I miss her every day." His eyes flickered up to mine, and for a moment we were the closest we'd been in years, 2 broken pieces of the same person Linda had loved. But the moment didn't last. His gaze drifted again, this time toward the hallway with a hunger he tried too hard to hide. "Dad, your office still the same?" he asked casually, too casually. "Mostly," I said. He nodded, but his tongue pressed against his cheek, a tell he'd never grown out of. "You still keep stuff in there?" The question hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. I didn't answer immediately. I just sipped water and pretended not to hear the panic buried beneath his calm tone. "Just papers," I said. "Bills. Documents. Memories." His foot stopped bouncing. Completely. Like he was waiting for a specific word that never came. He stood up suddenly, the chair legs scraping against the floor with a sharp groan. "Mind if I use the bathroom?" he asked, but his eyes weren't on the bathroom door. They were locked on the hallway, on the office, on the secret he was still hiding, not from me, but from himself. "Down the hall," I said. He nodded and walked out of the kitchen, his steps slow at first, then quicker, like he was afraid he might lose his nerve. I waited a few seconds before quietly rising from my chair. I walked to the living room, pretending to straighten the tree lights, but really just listening. The bathroom door opened. Closed. No footsteps inside. Then, after a long, eerie pause, soft steps moved toward the office instead. My heart tightened. I didn't turn. Didn't call out. I just stood there, watching the reflection of the hallway in the dark window. The office door creaked faintly, a sound a stranger wouldn't notice, but I did. It was the same sound I'd heard 2 weeks ago at 2 a.m., when I'd woken to a noise I convinced myself was the house settling. The same sound that had led me the next morning to find the desk drawer slightly open, papers shuffled, the faint scent of cologne in a room no one had entered in months. Evan had been here before. Not tonight. Not this week. Before. Long before he ever texted that he was coming home for Christmas. Welcome to Hidden Truths. True Stories. If you're new here, I'm glad you found this place tonight. Tell me, where are you watching from? And if stories like these help you think, feel, or breathe a little easier, go ahead and subscribe. Now, let me tell you something I've never said out loud. It was Christmas Eve, a cold one, the kind of cold that clings to the windows like a memory that refuses to leave. I was standing in my living room holding an ornament Linda made 20 years ago. A small glass globe with a tiny paper snowflake inside. Every Christmas Eve she used to hang it on the front branch, right above the fireplace. After she passed, I never found the courage. Tonight, for the first time, I thought, maybe I should. Maybe for her. Maybe for me. But my hand wouldn't move. It just trembled there in the dim yellow glow of the tree. The house still smelled faintly of nutmeg and wool, Linda's winter scent, though I knew that was only in my head. Her knitting bag still sat on the couch, needles tucked into a half-finished scarf she never got to complete. I told myself I kept it there because I didn't want to disturb her things. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to disturb the illusion that she was still somewhere in the room with me. As I walked toward the kitchen to check the pyrgus boiling on the stove, her recipe, always her recipe, I noticed the envelope again. The same white envelope that had arrived 3 weeks ago with no return address. I'd tossed it on the dining table, pretending it wasn't important. Pretending I hadn't already opened it, read the numbers inside, and felt my stomach drop. $50,000 missing. Not a mistake. A withdrawal. A clean one. Someone had signed my name. I should have called the bank that day, but grief works in strange ways. I told myself I misread it. Told myself banks make errors. Told myself anything that would let me sleep at night. But the envelope sat there like a silent judge, reminding me something was terribly wrong. Then my phone buzzed. "Evan, Dad, I'm coming home for Christmas." I stared at those words longer than I should have. My son hadn't spent a Christmas with me since before Linda got sick. He barely called, barely texted, lived a life I only saw through scraps of social media and second-hand stories. But suddenly, tonight of all nights, he wanted to come home? My chest tightened, hope and dread mixing like warm and cold water fighting inside a pipe. I set the ornament down. Carefully. Like it might break if I breathed too hard on it. "All right," I whispered to no one. "Come home, son." But a gust of wind hit the window just then, sharp and angry, and for a moment, I swear Linda's reading glasses on the mantel rattled. Like she was trying to warn me. Like she was saying something was coming. Something I wasn't ready for. I kept checking the window every few minutes, watching the snow fall heavier than it had all season, thick flakes drifting under the street lamp like someone had shaken the sky and let the pieces fall where they wanted. Evan said he'd be here by 7, but 7 came and went, and with every passing minute a familiar ache returned. The same ache I felt the day he left for college without saying goodbye. The same ache I felt the night he didn't show up at the hospital when Linda asked for him with her last bit of strength. I stood there in the quiet house, stirring the pot on the stove even though the pyrgus were already finished, pretending to be busy because stillness made the loneliness louder. I tried calling him once, then twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked into the living room, glancing again at the envelope on the dining table. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I could still see those numbers burned into my memory. $50,000, drawn cleanly, confidently, like the person signing my name believed they had every right to take it. At 7:42, headlights cut through the window, slow, cautious, the way Evan always drove when he was nervous or unsure of himself. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, gripping the back of the dining chair, my fingers turning white. When he finally stepped out of the car, he stood still for a moment, staring at the house like it was a place he used to live in a lifetime he barely remembered. I watched his shoulders rise and fall in the cold air before he walked toward the door. The porch light flickered when he stepped onto the wooden boards, another thing I kept telling myself I'd fix, but never did. He knocked gently, almost like he didn't want to be heard. For a second, I wondered if he'd turn around and leave before I even opened it. When I pulled the door open, the first thing I noticed was how tired he looked. Not physically, though he'd lost weight, and his eyes were rimmed with red, but tired in his soul. A kind of exhaustion that clung to him like the snow melting on his jacket. "Hey, Dad," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stepped aside and let him in, and the warmth of the house wrapped around him like a blanket he wasn't sure he deserved. The moment he saw the tree, he paused. His gaze drifted to the ornament I'd placed on the coffee table, the one Linda always hung. His expression flickered, pain, guilt, something else, but he blinked it away and cleared his throat. "It smells like Mom in here," he murmured, more to himself than to me. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. He took off his coat, hands trembling slightly, and hung it on the hook Linda used to use. I watched him glance around the room, lingering too long on the mantel, where her reading glasses rested. He swallowed hard, then forced another smile. "You cooked?" he asked, like it surprised him. "Her recipe," I said quietly. He nodded, but his eyes darted away too quickly. Something was wrong. Something deeper than time apart or grief. I felt it in the way he paced, in the way he kept touching his pockets, in the way he avoided the dining table, avoided that envelope like he could actually feel it staring at him. And as he walked toward the kitchen, pretending to admire the lights, his voice cracked just slightly when he said, "Feels like nothing's changed." Nothing had.